I woke up on the cold tile floor of the bathroom, the salty taste of blood still in my mouth. Not an accident. It was my husband's hand, Cameron's, that struck my face last night. He walked in, placed the bottle of foundation on the sink as if setting down a cup of coffee. My mother's coming. Don't let her see those marks. I looked in the mirror, one eye swollen and purple, lips split open, and behind me was the man who treated his wife's pain like dust to be brushed away. But he didn't know. The name on the marriage certificate wasn't my real name, and today's bruise wouldn't be covered like before. It would be the first warning for a reckoning of everything. I remember clearly the first time I met Cameron, not because he stood out, but because I was trying to make myself invisible. At that time, I worked as a research assistant in a small lab in the north of Seattle, where the fluorescent lights on the ceiling shone down on rows of cool machines like the scrutinizing eyes of a world I didn't belong to. I often stayed late, wiping tables, organizing papers, just to avoid going back to a place I called home but never felt warm. Cameron appeared in a project meeting, not as a colleague but as a representative of a funding partner. A fitted gray suit, spotless shoes, a voice deep enough and a gaze long enough to make one feel noticed but not invaded. He knew how to talk, how to compliment me with words that made me blush yet feel seen, truly seen by someone who seemed to understand my real worth. That was my weakness. He said, "I've never seen anyone prepare presentation slides the way you do. Even the color choices make people want to keep listening." I laughed, as if it was something small. But in truth it hit exactly what I'd always wanted someone to see. Not my ability, but my existence. The coffee meetings that followed came naturally, like steps going downhill. When I started calling him Cam instead of Mr. Whitehall, I had already forgotten my own rule. Never trust someone who knows too well how to use gentle words as traps. He didn't ask much about me. On the contrary, when I said I was an only child, had no parents, and had changed my last name after a family incident, he nodded, gently placed his hand on mine without pressing further. That feeling made me believe that finally, someone understood that not everyone wants to retell the place where they once drowned. 4 months later, we had a small wedding at a privately rented chapel on Bainbridge Island. No friends, no relatives, no one to oppose, no one to congratulate. I wore a discounted white dress with 3/4 sleeves, he tied his own bow tie. We exchanged vows before an elderly minister whose radiant smile I didn't dare look at for long, afraid I'd see the innocence in those eyes. On paper I was Priscilla Moore, born in 1990 Inches, Colorado. But no one knew that this name would exist only for a few months. Before that, I carried the last name of a mother never recorded in any hospital file, a woman declared legally incompetent when I was still in my crib, who disappeared after a closed court session no one was allowed to film or record. Cameron knew nothing about it. And I once believed he didn't need to know. Everything from my past had been folded, placed in a metal box, then buried under the cement floor of a warehouse in the southern part of the state. I believed that if I lived properly and played the role of a normal wife, no one would ever dig up that box. He bought a small wooden house in the south of Tacoma, saying it was to start a real life. We moved there a week after the wedding. Every morning I made bread, brewed coffee, waited for him to wake up. Every afternoon I cleaned the kitchen, wrote in my journal, sometimes drew a few pencil sketches in my notebook. Once he asked what I studied, I said, technical drawing, and behavioral psychology. He laughed, strange combination. I laughed too, but didn't tell him that it was that very strangeness that saved me through years locked behind wooden doors, where people didn't call me a patient but a number. We seemed peaceful. Until Cameron started coming home late, and I had to cook exactly the dishes his mother liked, had to avoid asking questions that might make him frown. Every night I had to wait long enough not to be called impatient, and every morning I had to wake up early to prepare everything perfectly, like an unannounced test. But what made me feel most unfamiliar wasn't Cameron, but myself, the woman who had once sworn never to let anyone control her again. One night, he came home late, smelling faintly of alcohol. I asked, "Dinner's ready, do you want some?" He glanced at me, then turned on the TV. I kept washing dishes, not noticing, until I heard a glass shatter behind me. He had kicked it. For no reason. A part of me wanted to ask, why? Another part whispered, "You already know. Don't ask." From that night on, I started recording our conversations. Not because I thought I'd expose him, but because I needed to remember. When you've lived too long in the gray zone of memory, you have to learn to keep everything real. Cameron gradually showed his control, not with fists at first, but with mockery, disdainful looks, and lines like, "Good thing you don't have family. Saves me the trouble of diplomacy." Or, "No one knows who you are, so even if you say something, no one will believe you." The following weeks passed like nameless slices of time. We took a few belated wedding photos. I sent thank you cards to some old classmates I wasn't sure still existed. Cameron started talking more about his mother, who would come stay with us for a while because she needs care, and you're free. I didn't object. But inside, a quiet emptiness cracked open. I found the letter one gray afternoon, in the mailbox at the gate, wedged between the electric bill and a pizza flyer. The envelope had no sender's address, the paper slightly wrinkled, the top left corner stained as if someone had held it with wet hands. I almost threw it into the trash with the junk mail, but the bold, smudged ink stopped me. "Amy Devlin is not dead. She's waiting to take everything back." I stood still on the stone path, the cloth grocery bag slipping from my elbow without me realizing it. The wind began to rise, brushing dry leaves against my ankles, but I didn't move. The name Amy felt as if someone had whispered it right behind my neck, though no one was there. I had killed that name with my own hands 12 years ago. Amy Devlin. The name of a girl the whole country once knew as the only daughter of Lucian Devlin, the founder of Devlin Technologies. Once called by Forbes a man ahead of his time. The man with salt and pepper hair and eyes as blue as frozen lakes, who used to hold me in his arms after every failed design and say, "You're the only perfect thing I ever made." The man the newspapers wrote had burned to death in a lab accident, his body unrecognizable. And me? I vanished. Not exactly missing, but erased from the map like an unnecessary detail of a painting that no longer had value. I was taken away at night. A woman with thin-rimmed glasses and the smell of disinfectant came for me, showing a court order I didn't have time to read. 16 years old, hair still wet, hands stained with ink, I was declared mentally unfit to protect myself. Within hours, I was no longer Amy. I became a number in a juvenile mental support center in the countryside, far from any signal. 2 years later, I walked out with a name change paper and a memory torn apart like dreams no one wanted to hear again. Priscilla Moore. A name too plain, no one knowing who I was. And now, after all those years, someone had just lifted the blanket over the past that I had traded my youth to cover. I folded it, hid it inside the cover of an old cookbook so Cameron wouldn't see. My hands trembled, but I tried not to let it affect the soup I was cooking. The smell of celery started to spread through the kitchen, pulling me back to reality. Cameron would be home soon, and I needed to prepare the face he wanted to see. But my mind wasn't there. It was running back to the white rooms of the old hospital, to my father's unfinished sketches, to the fragmented conversations I once thought were hallucinations, but now, perhaps they were memories buried too deep. That night, when Cameron was asleep, I quietly stepped into the small office at the end of the hallway. The room I used to call my refuge whenever my mind was tangled like thread, where I kept old things no one asked about. I opened the small metal box hidden under the bookshelf. My fingers touched each item inside like someone searching through broken pieces. An old photo of my father and me, blurred at the lower corner. A pocket watch no longer ticking, but engraved with the words "to AD. For every second we lost." And a hand-drawn sheet of the ground floor map of Devlin Technologies headquarters, the one I secretly copied when I was interning with my father. Each of those things had once been a part of myself I forced into forgetting. Now, each piece had become evidence. I opened my computer and searched for Lucian Devlin. The results were no different from what I had read hundreds of times. Lab accident, body burned beyond recognition. Authorities concluded it was a technical mishap. The problem was, my father had never worked in a lab without a second layer of protection. He was obsessed with safety. He once fired an engineer on the spot for failing to install a heat sensor correctly. That explosion long ago, it had stopped hurting me. It made me suspicious. I switched to searching for things not on the front page. Archived records, old newspapers, rumor forums. It wasn't until nearly 3 a.m., my eyes blurred from the screen, that I stumbled on a short comment on an abandoned tech forum. Devlin sent an encrypted file to Wynn and Associates 3 days before the fire. They never disclosed it. User. Latchkey. 8. Wynn and Associates. A law office that had once worked with my father on many deals. I remembered the name because Mr. Wynn had been my father's close friend. I used to call him Uncle Doug. I looked up his address right that night. The office had dissolved. But I found a home address, the place where he had registered a land donation for nature conservation last year. A small town 3 hours drive from here. Before the sky could lighten, I had packed a few things, slipped that letter into my wallet. On the way out of town, as the rows of wooden houses receded in the rearview mirror, I heard my father's voice in my head. Not everything lost is your fault. But if you don't go back for it, that will be a choice. I didn't know what I would find. But if Amy Devlin was not dead, then it was time for her to return. Lunch played out like a wedding feast between people already divorced in their minds. Eleanor Rowe sat across from me, a spotless white napkin laid neatly on her lap, her hands clasped with a proud air as if this were her house, not mine, and my husband's. Her eyes swept the dining table, then stopped on the antique wooden plate I had carefully chosen from a flea market. Lunch to welcome a guest, and you use this? Her voice wasn't loud, but enough to chill the small kitchen by a degree. I kept my smile, my hand lightly gripping the chair edge. I like minimalism. And this salad. Oh, there's nothing wrong with simple. She cut me off, scooping a small bite into her spoon. It's, not everyone fits it. Just like not everyone fits being the wife of a man like Cameron. He gave a light laugh and bent down to cut a piece of meat on his plate. A lazy, indifferent curl of the lips, cruel in its casualness. As if he were savoring each gentle slice his mother was using to flay me alive right at the table. And he thought I would swallow it like all the times before. Eleanor continued her quality check with random yet precise jabs. The salad was too bland, the scented candle too strong, the flowers a bit ordinary. Each word shot straight at the smallest effort I had made. Not because she cared about the details, but because she hated my existence. Simple as that. I looked at her, as if trying to memorize every feature of an enemy wrapped in the label, family. The flawless white skin of someone who cared for appearances but let her soul corrode. Platinum blonde waves, stiff and shiny like a mask. What did you do before you married Cameron? I knew this question wasn't from curiosity, but to strike me down. I used to do behavioral research. In Seattle. Oh, research, she nodded, drawing out the last sound. Sounds like more sitting than doing. Yes, it does require sitting. To observe how people manipulate each other politely. She flinched slightly, then pressed her lips together. Cameron laughed out loud. I wasn't sure whether he was laughing at my words or at his mother's small misstep, but I didn't find it funny. When the dishes were cleared, Eleanor stood up, taking a long breath, leaving her plate and spoon half finished. I'll go rest in my room for a bit. This chair hurts my back. Cameron, remember to get my luggage later. Yes, mother, he replied, still not looking at me once. When she disappeared up the stairs, I stepped into the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly. Every meeting with Eleanor was like an invisible battle. But this time, I hadn't come empty-handed. Before she arrived, I had placed a small recorder under the candle mat in the center of the table. Not because I needed evidence for a divorce, I knew Cameron would never let me go that easily. But because I needed to keep every word, every act of arrogance, every shard of malice she hurled at me like broken glass, so later, when I needed to remember why I had to rise, I could hear it clearly. That night, after finishing the cleaning, I entered the bedroom while Cameron was changing clothes. His shirt lay draped across the bed, the scent of post-shower cologne still hanging in the air. He sat on the bed, his voice low as if tired. You saw my mother trying. What about you? Trying? She's only staying for a few weeks. Can't you not make it harder? I breathed slowly, gripping the towel in my sleeve. She insulted me in front of you. You said nothing. She's testing you. All mothers do. You let your mother test your wife by saying I'm not worthy. By saying I'm not enough. Priscilla. His voice began to rise. Such a small thing and you have to blow it up. A small thing. I asked back, keeping my voice as low as I could. You see, telling your wife she's not qualified is a small thing. He narrowed his eyes, his voice like a knife. And you think you're so noble? A girl with no family, no friends, no assets, no name. No one knows who you are, and to be honest, no one wants to know. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I remember my shoulder hitting the edge of the nightstand, my vision darkening for a moment, and then I was on the floor. Cameron didn't apologize. He walked into the bathroom, the sound of water running behind the half-closed door. As if everything was an accident he could wash off with a shower and some warm water. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the dull ache spreading up my neck. But the worst pain wasn't in my body, it was realizing that I had been treated as if I were air, as something non-existent, as someone no one needed to believe or keep. I forced myself up, sitting straight on the edge of the bed. I picked up my phone, opened the recording I had saved. I listened again to Eleanor's slow, disdainful voice. Cameron's voice when he laughed, when he defended his mother, when he was indifferent to me. I skipped ahead, then stopped at a short segment. When you married her, we were done. It was Eleanor's voice. I plugged in my headphones, saved that recording onto a spare memory card, then turned off the screen. When I looked up, the face in the mirror was no longer swollen and purple, but in my eyes was something more frightening than a bruise. It was the first truly clear notion of what I was about to do. I knew from this moment on I would no longer stay silent. But to take everything back, I had to do it from within the very darkness they had tried to lock me in. The next morning, the sky was overcast as if the whole city already knew what was about to happen. Cameron left the house while I was still sitting in the kitchen, stirring a cup of cold coffee I had been holding for nearly an hour. He didn't say a word, didn't wish me good morning, didn't apologize. Just threw a glance over as if I were a chair out of place. And then slammed the car door hard enough to send the sparrows in the yard flying up. I heard the engine fade away without turning my head. The bruise under my collar had nearly faded. But one thing remained: the silence, a very different stillness, not the kind I used to hide in, but the kind I was now using to prepare. I put the memory card into a sealed envelope, carefully wrote a single name: Win. At that moment, downtown, Cameron stopped his car in front of an 8-story building with the logo he had once boasted was built from nothing. His office was on the 6th floor, not big, not small. Enough for him to look down on others while still being called humble. As soon as he walked into the lobby, he saw his secretary, Emily, hurrying over with a face she couldn't hide as tense. "There's someone waiting for you in the big conference room." "About asset ownership." Cameron frowned. "Which asset?" "I'm not sure. But there's a lawyer with them. They said it has to be face to face." He adjusted his tie, pulled out his phone to check messages. Nothing foreshadowed this. Not from the board, not from partners. Everything on today's schedule was the usual meetings, quarterly reports, and a lunch with the marketing representative. He took a deep breath, drummed his fingers lightly on the wooden table as he entered the conference room. And then, he froze. I was sitting at the head of the table, in the chair reserved for the host. Wearing a charcoal blazer, hair tied neatly back, my hands resting on a thick folder stamped with an embossed seal, Devlin Holdings confidential legal brief. Seated next to me was Mr. Douglas Wynne, who had once served as legal counsel for Lucian Devlin, my father, before the fire that labeled him permanently missing. Cameron tried to hide his surprise in his posture. But I saw it clearly, the small wrinkle appearing between his brows, the way he pulled his back away from the chair, as if it had become dangerous. "Priscilla?" I slowly raised my head. "My name is Amelia Devlin Moore. You signed a marriage certificate with the legal heir of Devlin Technologies. Perhaps you should sit down." It took a few seconds for that sentence to sink in. Cameron looked at Mr. Wynne, as if hoping someone would confirm this was a very bad joke. "What is this? What are you doing here? And that name? Where did you get it?" "I didn't get it. It's the name I was born with. It never disappeared, just hidden very carefully." I opened the folder, slid each page toward him. "This is the federal court order changing my identity at age 18, after being released from the juvenile psychological rehabilitation program. This is the final power of attorney from my father, Before the fire, someone called a technical accident. This is the amended company charter signed in 2006, transferring intellectual property rights to the sole heir Amelia Devlin. When she turned 25, Cameron stared at each line, each seal. His lips moved. His hands trembled slightly, not enough for anyone but me to see, but I saw it very clearly. I leaned back slightly in my chair, calm as if listening to a symphony I had memorized. Mr. Wynne said nothing. He only placed on the table a copy of the marriage contract, the one Cameron had hastily signed to legalize marrying me in less than 3 months. You signed with the name Priscilla Moore. But my legal representative has verified and restored the validity of my original identity. The name on the property registry was updated yesterday. I paused, smiled faintly. It's a shame you didn't read the clause about community property in marriage. Cameron exhaled sharply, slammed the table, and stood up. I don't get it. Who are you? What the hell are you? His voice cracked, like glass breaking under unseen pressure. I stayed seated, tilting my head slightly, gently. I'm the girl you thought would stay silent forever. The woman you believed would submit her whole life. But you were wrong, Cameron. Because the woman sitting in front of you today is no longer Priscilla. And the truth is, she never was. A stillness spread through the room, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Outside, light rain began to fall, the first drops of the season sliding down the glass like whispers I'd heard in old dreams, the whispers of my father, of the forgotten woman, of the child stripped of her name. Cameron finally dropped back into his chair, shoulders collapsing as if his spine had been pulled from his body. He no longer looked at me. His eyes stared into the empty space ahead, a void filled with things he couldn't name. I turned to Mr. Wynne softly. Shall we continue with the rest? He nodded. I've prepared the transfer of management documents. The board will receive the official notice this afternoon. I left the building after the meeting with Cameron through the side elevator where no secretary waited to greet, no one glanced my way. I didn't want to walk through the main lobby. I wasn't ready to meet the eyes of those who had once called me the boss's wife, people who would now have to relearn how to pronounce the name Devlin with a very different tone. Mr. Douglas Wynne waited for me in the car. No longer in the formal suits of the past, he wore a gray turtleneck sweater, shoulders slightly stooped, face lined with 67 years of life. But his eyes still carried the same light, the eyes of the man who once helped my father reclaim an entire company from a storm of lawsuits, before vanishing from the world for reasons no one ever understood. What did he say? He asked, not needing to specify who. I took off my gloves, my gaze fixed on the skyscrapers in the distance. There's nothing left to say. He reached toward the leather box beside him, took out a small object wrapped in coarse fabric, and placed it in my palm. Someone came to see me. About 3 days after the fire. Not the police. Not an investigator. A strange man, didn't give a name, put this on the table and said Lucian wanted me to keep it. When the time comes, that's what he said. I unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small USB drive, its surface yellowed with time. I held it lightly, as if it were the last relic of my father. What do you think is inside? I asked. I don't know, he answered slowly. I once thought about opening it. But then, I was afraid. Because if it's what I think it is, what's inside could turn everything upside down. And I wasn't sure anyone was ready to bear that. Until now. We said nothing more the entire drive to his small house, where he had lived since retiring. Every step into that home felt like walking back into another time when I used to sit quietly in the conference room, listening to my father discuss strategy with older men, and Mr. Wynne's voice would always come last, slow but decisive. He plugged the USB into an old laptop. The black screen flashed white letters. If you're watching this, I'm probably already gone. I recognized my father's voice instantly. My breath caught. The image flickered, a hospital room, dim and flickering light. My father sat on a metal bed, wearing a faded patient gown. His face gaunt, eyes sunken, hair gray but still him. He looked straight into the camera. My name is Lucian Devlin. I'm not dead. I'm being held in a psychiatric facility, under the label of a delusional patient. But I am completely lucid. I know what they're doing. And I know who's behind it. He leaned over, placed a thin file on the table, his voice slower. If Amy is listening, I want to tell her this. You are not insane. You didn't imagine everything. They made you believe that. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. But I haven't given up. I bit my lip, my hand gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles went white. The screen blurred for a few seconds, then continued. The person who signed my psychiatric order was Eleanor Rowe under the title of a member of the Estate Control Board. Signing on behalf of the heir, due to psychological instability risk. She was once a senior legal advisor under the government council. She knows how to write an order that holds weight. And she knows how to hide it. But if someone finds this video, it means I couldn't win. It means everything now depends on you. Mr. Wynne pressed pause. She had legal authority to sign that order? I asked, my voice trembling. No. Unless someone consented. Someone in the family. A spouse. Or the heir. I understood immediately. Cameron. I turned away. The pain spread fast, like boiling water over bare skin. Not because Cameron betrayed me, but because I had lived with that betrayer, eaten with him, slept beside him, shared a bed without ever realizing. I once thought I was sharp enough to tell who was real and who was false. Turns out, I was only good at hiding myself. He knew, I whispered. He knew, and he stayed silent. Because if I had no one, then I had no right to claim anything. I looked back at the screen. My father stood up, stepping closer to the camera. You don't need to avenge me. You're the last person to carry the Devlin name. They can't erase you like they did before. They can only make you afraid. But if you overcome the fear, you'll take it all back. The screen went dark. I sat there for a long time. Only one thought echoed in my mind, as vivid as if written in red ink. I am the last Devlin. And I am still alive. I need every document from the time my father's order was signed. Everyone who approved it, who was silenced, and who's still in their seat. Mr. Wynne looked at me, as if seeing the man he had once stood beside for 2 decades. Then we begin. I was in a meeting with Wynne and the legal team when the office landline rang. Not my cell phone, not an email, but the old black phone with a fixed line whose existence I had almost forgotten. Sarah, my new secretary, entered with a tense face. There's a boy. Standing at the gate. He says he wants to see you. He called you. Mom. I stood up so slowly I didn't realize I had left the meeting unfinished. The room froze behind me, whispers dying out, replaced by the echo of my footsteps on the wooden floor. I didn't ask anything. Nor did I want Sarah to explain. When I stepped out into the main lobby, the sky had turned gray. The child stood there, small, thin, about 11 years old. A gray hoodie, clutching a torn stuffed bear, muddy shoes. He looked up at me as I approached. That look, I had seen it before. Not in real life. But in the dream that had repeated for more than 10 years, the one with the crying sound in a white room, with a small hand gripping my shirt and slipping away under dim lights. I knelt down, my voice trembling. What's your name? The boy reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out a crumpled envelope and pushed it into my hand. Then he pointed to his chest, where a faintly embroidered word could still be read, Ben. I opened the envelope. Inside was a faded color photocopy, a birth certificate from St. Augustine Hospital, Nevada. Mother's name, Amelia Devlin. Date of birth 11 years ago. Just below it, a handwritten note added later in red ink. Memory loss after accident. Transferred for recovery treatment, Garden Hill facility. I couldn't feel my legs. I don't remember how I made it back into the office. Only that, inside the elevator, I saw my reflection blurred as if someone else were wearing my face. Wynne took the paper, skimmed it quickly, then exhaled softly. I once heard rumors about this, he said. Garden Hill was tied to several accusations, but all were buried fast. I sank into the chair, gripping the paper so tightly my fingers went numb. Why would they do this? The question should be, who needed you to disappear? And why exactly at that time? I retrieved my file box, pulled out the folder once marked Do Not Open. Inside was everything I had kept from my forced treatment hospital admission dates, altered psychological evaluations, prescriptions of unknown origin. And there was a 6-month gap with no medical record at all. 6 months. I whispered. That was the time I gave birth without even knowing it. Wynne went quiet, then looked straight into my eyes. Did you ever sign any papers while your mind was blurred? Some, I said. I don't remember exactly. I knew that if I didn't sign, they wouldn't let me eat or sleep. They called it treatment control. Wynne's hands clenched tightly. Then you never abandoned your child. They forced you. I nodded, though waves of guilt kept crashing through me, as if I had betrayed the most sacred thing a mother could ever have. Ben was still sitting in the waiting room. Sarah had brought him a cup of warm milk and some cookies. He whispered a soft thank you. When I approached, he handed me the teddy bear he was holding. This belongs to Mom, he said. A nurse told me. She said you left it. I took the bear. Its worn, soft face made my throat tighten. Beneath the frayed fur was a small stitched line. I carefully cut it open with the tiny scissors from my purse, my hands trembling as though I were tracing pain itself. Inside, I found a small folded note written in my own handwriting, shaky, smudged with ink, but unmistakable. If you're taken somewhere else, if I can't be with you, know that I never left you. They took you from me, but they could never take away my love for you. I held Ben tightly for the first time with the heart of a mother. Wynne stood by the door, his face heavy. I think it's time to press charges, he said. Not charges, I replied. I want Ben's identity restored. And I want the person who signed the order separating us to face the light. Wynne spoke slowly, each word deliberate. We'll be up against the old system. The ones who held power at Devlin Tech still have reach. And if Eleanor was behind this, I tightened my hold on Ben's hand. Then it's all the more reason to bring it into the light. I stood before the mirror, my hand running along the fabric of my dress as if to read my memories through touch. A white silk gown, square neckline, long sleeves and a skirt, light as mist. Every stitch had been sewn by my father, who spent almost 4 months completing it when I was 15, saying only one thing: you'll wear this when you become yourself. I once believed that day would never come. But tonight, I would walk into the heart of the family that destroyed my father, stole my child, and imprisoned me in a false identity, and I would not bow. The Rowe family's annual gala was held at the Langford Hotel, once a symbol of Seattle's power in the 80s, with its crystal ceilings and gold-plated elevators. Eleanor had rented out the entire top floor, draped in white silk and red roses, with lighting soft enough to look elegant but never harsh. Every detail had been meticulously planned except me. I wasn't part of her script tonight. From the second-floor balcony, I watched everything unfold. Eleanor in a dark blue high-necked gown, surrounded by politicians and businessmen, smiling enough to charm and enough to threaten. Cameron stood slightly behind her, one hand in his pocket, his eyes distant as though counting the seconds until he could leave. The confidence he once wore like a mask was gone, replaced by the quiet collapse of a man who knew the walls behind him were cracking. Are you sure? Wynne's voice came softly through the earpiece hidden beneath my hair. I'm sure, I answered. The recording will go live on the Seattle broadcast and the live stream. When you reach the third line, I'll press the button. I walked down the staircase as if time itself had stopped. Every gaze turned toward me not because they recognized who I was, but because of the dress. It wasn't trendy, it didn't sparkle, and it wasn't short like the dresses of women trying to make magazine covers. It was still timeless. Eleanor's eyes lifted when she saw me. Priscilla? She said with a faint frown. I thought you weren't coming. Perhaps what you meant, I said evenly, was that you didn't think I'd have the courage. I turned toward the microphone at the center of the stage, where the announcement for the charity fund in my name was about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady and clear. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm deeply touched that the name Priscilla Moore has been used to create a charity for the community. But before we continue, I want to share something a bit more personal. Eleanor took half a step forward, but Wynne appeared from behind the stage, handing her a temporary restraining order, granted that afternoon by a King County judge, forbidding interference with my personal speech. Her face froze mid-expression. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people who had once called me the good daughter-in-law, and those who had never once called me by my real name. I'm not Priscilla Moore. That was a false name forced on me during a time when I had no right to resist. My name is Amelia Devlin, the only daughter of Lucian Devlin, founder of Devlin Technologies. And I've come back to tell the truth. 12 years ago, my father didn't die in the fire. He was imprisoned. I wasn't insane, I was drugged. And when they took me from the hospital, I didn't lose my name. I lost my son. A gasp spread through the room. Cameron stepped back, his face turning white. I pulled a small USB from the pocket of my gown and plugged it into the broadcast system. The massive screen behind me came to life, echoing through the silent hall. If you want her gone from the system, you have to sign. Without papers, we're not legal. It was Cameron's voice. Another voice followed, colder, sharper. Don't worry. The lawyer's been paid. He'll confirm Amelia's unstable. Change her identity, transfer her, revoke custody. After that, no one will ever find that child again. Eleanor's voice. Eleanor tried to break free from Wynn's grip, but too late. She was handcuffed before she reached the second step. Cameron bolted toward the side door, only to be stopped by 2 civil security officers waiting for him. I stood still beneath the crystal lights and the chaos. I was no longer the girl abandoned in a ward with a plastic meal box and nameless pills. No longer the mother who cried through nights haunted by a child's phantom voice. No longer Eleanor's daughter-in-law or Cameron's wife. I was simply Amelia, wearing the white gown my father had made for the day I would step out of the dark. Under every light. Before every lens. Without trembling once. Under the soft yellow glow of Devlin Hall, I stood before the old wooden podium that had witnessed countless speeches about innovation, compassion, and lies. This place once belonged to my father. Now it belonged to me. My reflection shimmered faintly on the glass nameplate. Amelia Devlin, Honorary Director and Court-Appointed Custodian of Devlin Technologies. My name. No longer mistaken, no longer forged, no longer hidden behind polite nods. I brushed my fingers over the wood. My hand no longer trembled. Good evening, everyone. My voice carried evenly. In the audience sat my father's old employees, loyal shareholders, and those who had stayed silent while he was locked away. There were no flashing cameras, no reporters, no scandals to bury. I was once called unstable, I said, looking straight ahead. I was given drugs that blurred the difference between day and night. I was threatened, coerced into signing away my parental rights in a white room with no windows. Ben sat nearby, perched on Wynn's knee, swinging his legs gently while clutching the old teddy bear, the only thing that had ever tied me to my son when everything else was taken away. I was hit once, I continued. And afterward, I was handed a makeup kit with the softest voice saying, "Your mother-in-law's coming, cover it up." There was murmuring in the May hall, not because of the violence, but because of the hush that followed it, the same quiet countless women endure every day, every year. But the most painful part wasn't being called crazy. It was being made to believe it. To believe that my doubts were wrong. That my child never existed. That my father was dead. That signing away my rights was part of my treatment. A faint wind swept through the windows, carrying the scent of coming snow. I looked toward the middle rows, where a few older women nodded softly. One held another's hand. Another pressed her palm to her chest. I didn't know them, but their eyes told me they had once heard and never been believed. "I'm speaking," I said clearly, for myself and for all those who were forced into silence. Whose identities were blurred, whose names were changed, whose voices were rewritten, all to please a system that couldn't bear the truth. A collective breath rippled through the room like waves across still water. This is Devlin Hall. But it's not where my father once created. It's where he was trapped. Where a forged signature kept him locked away for 6 years as a patient. Just as I was locked away for 6 months for carrying the Devlin name. I paused, my eyes drifting to the tall window overlooking the square. Snow had begun to fall, the first flakes of the season. Silent but not invisible. Then I said what wasn't in the script, but came straight from my heart. I'm not reclaiming a crown. I'm reclaiming a voice. And that voice will never be buried again. I stepped down from the stage. Ben ran toward me, wrapping his arms around me, his head resting on my shoulder like any child seeking safety. "So now you're a superhero, right?" he asked. I knelt down, holding him close, my chin resting on his warm, soft hair. Not a superhero, I whispered. A mother who finally got her voice back. Ben laughed, that pure honest laugh of a child, as if everything in the world could start again. We left the hall under gazes no longer filled with pity or judgment, but recognition. Outside, the snow fell softly. Ben tugged my hand as we walked down the stone path leading to the square. No one called me Priscilla anymore. No one asked, "Where are you going?" Or "Where's your mother-in-law?" No dress was chosen for me. No voice told me to be gentle. Only an old doorman smiled as I passed, holding the door open. "Welcome home, Amelia," he said, his voice deep and kind, caring nothing about who I had been, only who I was now. I stepped into the falling snow, holding my son's hand. For the first time in years I didn't feel cold. No more bruises to hide. No more lowering my head when someone called the wrong name. Because now, I had back the three things that mattered most: my true name, my true child, and my true voice. And none of them could ever be taken again. Some things that seem lost forever return the moment we dare to step through fear and speak. My story isn't about reclaiming an identity, it's about reclaiming myself. If you've stayed until now, thank you for being with me. Please like, follow, and subscribe to keep joining these real stories, quiet, but never invisible. Where are you watching from? Did something in this story touch a memory of your own? Share it in the comments below.